All right, we are back with another episode of Goddess Bible Study. We got Joshua, the apostate priest, in the house, and Lisa Adams, the pagan priestess. I'm your hostess. I'm your hostess. I'm your host, Ed Dodge, author of I run lostgoddess.io and wrote History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible, which we're adapting this all from. So, Goddess Bible Study, we're looking at the goddesses in the Bible and how they got thrown out in the right now we're talking about the Old Testament and the divorce. So we are into an epic period here. This is the 8th century BC of this is real history. So we're at King Hezekiah, who is one of the great reformer kings, uh, going to war against the goddesses, and the siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrians. So we got some imagery here, some AI imagery here. So in the background, we've got Assyrian siege ramps outside of the walled city of Jerusalem, which was a pretty tough city in its day. Back in the day, it was difficult to get into. Um, on the bottom left, we've got the tunnels. Hezekiah built this famous water tunnel that's still there. That's quite a remarkable feat of engineering. We've got on the right the smashed altar. They're bringing down the Asherah poles, and at the bottom you've got the smashed bronze serpent, the Neshustan of Moses. That we will talk about all these things. Um, wouldn't it be awesome if the archaeologists found the Nehushtan and found the actual one? That would be pretty dope. Um, but they have not found it. So, in this episode of Goddess Bible Study, we are digging into one of the most turbulent periods in the long fight against the Mother Goddess. King Hezekiah was one of the most important Hebrew kings and one of the great Yahwist reformers who worked to eliminate the goddesses and the pagan idols. He was considered a near messianic figure, remembered for his dedication to Yahweh and his success in holding the Assyrians back from destroying Jerusalem. Hezekiah ruled Judah from 715 to 686 BC, and is exceptionally well attested by archaeologists, having left permanent marks on the city of Jerusalem that can still be seen today. We're really getting into like firm historical record here at this point in the whole story going forward. We have lots of evidence for everything we're talking about. Um, so, as a young man, Hezekiah witnessed the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel at the hands of the Assyrians. That's in 722, and he spent much of his reign contending with that same aggressive empire. Refugees from the fallen northern kingdom streamed into Judah during this period, including followers of the northern prophets. And there's a lot of stuff that the biblical scholars will get into. We don't get into this article, but in terms of the development of monotheism, the development of Yahweh and the prophets, and a lot of stuff that goes down with those northern folks coming into Jerusalem and merging their stuff. The biblical scholars get into this in some nuance. Um, so anyway, Hezekiah was preceded by his father, the pagan king Ahaz, who was very bad. If you remember, we talked about him last week. He built an altar to at the Assyrian god Ashur inside the Hebrew temple itself. Ahaz was condemned by the prophet Isaiah and by the biblical writers generally as a committed pagan. He worshipped Baal, sacrificed his own children, and made offerings on the high places. He was very bad. So his son Hezekiah, though, wanted nothing to do with any of this. He didn't merely decline to follow in his father's footsteps, he refused Ahaz even a proper burial. Um, so Hezekiah was one of only two biblical kings, the other one being Josiah, that we'll come to. Um, one of only two biblical kings recorded as being fully committed to Yahweh. He carried out dramatic religious reforms and set out to exterminate pagan religion in Judah entirely, with the prophet Isaiah serving as his mentor and advisor throughout. Hezekiah smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles, and destroyed the high places used for community worship. So this is from Book of Second Chronicles. I typically quote from Kings because Kings seems like a better historical record. It's older than Chronicles, which is clearly written later on and is editorializing more. It's covering the same material, so I rarely quote from Chronicles, but sometimes it's useful. So in the first month, the Second Chronicles 29, in the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of Yahweh and repaired them. And when all this had ended, the Israelites who were there went out to the towns of Judah, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. They destroyed the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin, and in Ephraim and Manasseh. After they had destroyed all of them, the Israelites returned to their own towns and to their own property. He ordered the people living in Jerusalem to give the portion due the priests and Levites so they could devote themselves to the law of Yahweh. That was 2 Chronicles 31. So Hezekiah reopened and repaired the temple because his father Ahaz had let it fall apart, I guess. And he reinstated the Passover festival. He closed the public altars, smashed the idols, and cut down the Asherah poles across the kingdom. These reforms went far beyond symbolic. Hezekiah sought to centralize worship entirely at the Jerusalem temple, ordering that all offerings be consolidated into the hands of the temple priests. This centralization of worship was a critical step in the formation of the Judeo-Christian traditions, and it marks the first real attempt by the temple priests to consolidate all religious worship under their own authority. Paganism had always had and still does have a do-it-yourself religious framework rooted in family and community where anyone could build an altar and make an offering. The introduction of religious authorities who mediated all worship, who stripped ordinary people of the independence to create their own sacred spaces, would become a defining feature of Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions that followed. So I'd like to stop there, talk about this for a moment. Um, this is like the critical takeaway, I think, of Hezekiah. This is when they begin to centralize worship by force and with violence, and tell everybody you're not allowed to just do it yourself with your own names, the gods. You got to come into our temple and you got to make your offerings to us, the one priesthood, one God, one king, one priesthood, centralized power. They get all the money, they get all the offerings, and they get to mediate. The priests get to mediate the relationship to God. They get a monopoly on spirituality. And Lisa's got something to say.
Of course I do. Um, it it made me so sad and so angry to read this part. Um, and I think, in part it's because the stripping away of people's not just autonomy to, worship and practice as they desire, but to also kind of disconnect people from their direct connection to the gods or God or whatever it is that they believe in. It strips their own, personal connection to that. And that just seems like so empty. And I know that, as a pagan, as an animist, but also the people that I know and have, you know, like over decades within the broader pagan communities, one of the things that we value so very much is that we have not just autonomy to practice how we want, but also that we feel a deep connection and a deeply personal connection to, the powers that be, whatever we personally call them or how we think of them. It feels very personal. It feels really immediate. It feels very present. And that also goes with the connection to nature as well.
100%. And I would add to that by saying that this is what mystical traditions have all about have always been about, and there are many mystical traditions where people have a direct connection to God. This is what Gnostic Christianity is all about, using Jesus as a direct connection. That's why the church doesn't like the Gnostics, because they sidestep the priests. This is what Sufi Islamic mystics. I mean, there is the mystical side of Islam with the Sufis, which are a very big part of Islam, like not a trivial part of Islam. A big part of Islam is these direct mystical connections. The Hare Krishnas are doing this. Anytime where people are like chanting the names of God and getting into ecstatic dance, um, that is these personal mystical traditions where you're not using a priest to get to God. You do it yourself, and you have their own personal connection. Then also that the freedom that if you don't like a given priesthood, you can go down the road and like just change the name of the gods and like set up your own altar and set up your own and do it yourself. Like you don't have to, there's no authority that has any vested ability or vested right or power to tell you how to worship. And you're totally free to like, and this is like similar to how Protestant Christianity is. Protestants came to America and have religious freedom. There is no centralized authority in Protestantism. I mean, the different branches have different degrees of it. But the idea of Protestantism is also that you could have your own personal relationship to Jesus. They just want to mediate through the Bible. But if you get rid of that, if you go to Gnostic Christianity, you could have a blend of Protestantism and Gnosticism that could be pretty seamless. You have to drop the sola scriptura and put in, Sophia and the Mary Magdalene, and we could do it a different way with the Protestant churches. Um, so there's lots of traditions that do this, and this has been obviously been an age old fight. But what I found so interesting when I learned about this for the first time was just I don't know. For me, I like the history, so like putting it on the timeline and like putting out like a year on it and like a specific people and a specific context to me was very informative and informs my whole notion of the Bible and that like this stuff because like as a kid and in church is presented as being so timeless. It's all like out of time, like the world's only 6,000 years old and Abraham is only like in year 2000 and it's also like out of the time space normality. It's the Old Testament and Genesis especially that to sink these things into historical firmament, I think, and to say because we're going to get into like when they write these stories too, um, so that I found really powerful in helping me reacquaint myself just to the biblical text itself at all. Um, that to take it from this timelessness and put it and anchor it in historical context for me was very, very powerful.
Well, the other thing that they sort of stripped away from the people was, the celebrations and the festivals. And, the way that it's all really built around like your own home and property and your family, and then from there like your community and your region. Um, and I know to some extent there is that, like, say with like churches and everything, but it's still, it's not quite the same because you've still got like these few people in charge kind of doing all the organizing and telling you what to do and how to do it. Um, and so it just, the richness of community and the types of celebrations, like that can't be beat. Like that's just really super special and very deeply meaningful. And then, what you were talking about with like this is a point in history, it's it just blows my mind that the world is organized by this point in time that has to do with monotheism, because we don't get to really learn about any quote ancient history, which in a way wasn't all that long ago. We don't get to learn about that. We just get to learn about like more modern history and everything centered around this, right? All of this stuff, all of this monotheism, all of this like Yahweh and whatever Yahweh wants. And it's all to like kiss Yahweh's ass, I guess, in a sense. But it just, this is not when time began. But somebody somewhere, I'm thinking the church, right, just consolidated power and decided that this is the point at which we're going to start marking time and history in a specific way. And I just think it's such bullshit. But that's my personal opinion. So people can come at me and I don't care.
We can reset the calendar. We don't have to have that the year zero. I mean, it's all about Jesus, right? So, um, I have a whole thing about the whole 6,000 year calendar, but I won't do that. That's a whole nother topic. I get sidetracked. Um, so let's go back to this. All right. So smashing the bronze serpent. This is what we're talking about. If only the archaeologists could find this. Among Hezekiah's reforms, one act stands out as especially striking. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made. This was the bronze serpent Moses had fashioned in Numbers 21, 6-9 during the Exodus to heal the Israelites from a plague of snakes sent by Yahweh. By Hezekiah's time, the relic had been kept and venerated for roughly 500 years. So this is the quote from the Bible, 2 Kings 18, 4 to 5. He removed the high places. This talk about Hezekiah. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan, or however you say it. Hezekiah trusted in Yahweh, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. Very high praise there from the biblical writers. So in the Hebrew, Nehushtan means something like a mere piece of brass, a derogatory, dismissive label, though English Bibles typically present it as simply the object's proper name. This is one of the great flashpoints in the long divorce between Yahwism and the older religious worldview it grew out of, and a clear example of goddess adjacent symbol being deliberately purged by monotheistic reformers working to push its worship underground. That's a very clunky sentence. Um, it is safe to conjecture that the Garden of Eden story, with the serpent as the villain, was written in the same general time period as these reforms. So that's the whole. This is what I'm getting to: is that to smash the serpent goes along with the serpent in the Garden of Eden being turned into like a villain. Um, the serpent had always been a positive symbol in all of this pagan world, all of the ancient world. Serpents are everywhere. They're totally cool. They're totally positive. And the Bible is breaking with that when they turn the serpent into a villain. And I think this would be, I totally place the Garden of Eden story in this time period between Hezekiah, Josiah, or the Babylonian exile, right in this like sort of 100-year time period is when they would have, when I imagine they would have written the Garden of Eden story. Because it's, it's an attack on the Kadesha priestesses and these goddess traditions. And but yeah, smashing the serpent. This is really a strong symbol of, going to war with the goddess.
Yes, it is. So, you know, clearly, if it was being used as sort of like a charm or an amulet, in the way that Moses was using it, or why he made or fashioned it, you know, it seemed maybe like it had worked or whatever. But it's also somewhat surprising that they would want to desecrate something that Moses had created, since he's like this huge figure for them,
I know,
right?
right? Isn't that like a shocking? To me, that struck me as very odd, and yeah, that was really. I think that's a really odd detail.
Yeah. The other thing is, you know, the serpent, whether it's a snake or maybe a dragon, has so many deep layers of meaning. It has to do with cycles. So you can even think again about like the cycles of like the sun and the seasons and the planets and the stars. It's shedding. It's also regeneration and like the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. It's a symbol of wisdom. It's also a symbol of um, like health and vitality, and a symbol of like the energy that runs through the body, including the deep primordial energy of creation, like, to create life. So that's part of why it's, you know, included in the caduceus for like medicine. And, it's part of why they're clearly going after and attacking serpents, because serpents are like women, powerful, like a symbol of life and life giving, and a certain sort of like mysterious wisdom and understanding, as well as just like the cycles. It's very feminine, but at the same time, like it's eternal.
There you go. Yeah, that's why it shows up over and over again. It's the you see it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where he's gonna get the tree of immortality, and the serpent eats it, and the serpent sheds its skin. All this stuff. It's a great symbol, and I think it's another thing back to about Moses specifically is that this is why one of the reasons why I'm so convinced that the Moses story is written in many layers, and that what we read about Moses in like the Bible we get with all the Sermon on the Mount and all these big miracles, I think those stories developed over a really long period of time because I do we've discussed this. I do think there is a historical exodus that would have been led by historical Moses, But I don't think there's any religious reforms going on at that time at all. I think there's just followers of Yahweh escaping Egypt, and that all the religious reforms comes later, but gets mapped onto Moses to give it a authority and antiquity and make it seem heavier. But it's just completely made up by priests centuries later. It would be like somebody right now saying George Washington did all this stuff that George Washington never did. Um, that's totally how I
The
think
only
of it.
thing I the only thing I would want to add to this, the conversation that you two are describing is great, is just the destroying of the serpent could be seen as just, yeah, destroying the chthonic earth goddess. And to the extent that, I mean, at some point in our history, we stopped believing that animals were conscious like we are conscious, or plants were conscious like we are conscious. And I think it's more than just the symbol of the snake. It's possible that we're watching this disconnect with nature on very profound levels of communication that we had with Earth and with the animals and the creatures. And when you think of the snake and the serpent going into the earth, coming out of the earth, going back into the earth, just that observation of watching the animals communicate, not with words like we communicate, but what animals do by action, and us observing the animals, that we learned a lot from these creatures that we no longer do. And
Totally.
I think that this destruction of the creatures, our images of the creatures, which is just prolific in our, I mean, you can see it in Göbekli Tepe. We've been designing and forming creatures of the earth for a very long time, and this priest class of destruction, destroying iconoclasm, is really what it is, which the Christian church would later deal with. But the original iconoclasts probably got their inspiration from what we're seeing right here in their Old Testament with Hezekiah. This constant uncomfortability with images and things that have curves, and edges, and not just in the cerebral brain of right and wrong, or feelings of inadequacy or sin, or whatever this is that we're constantly coming up against, as this centralization of thought and control of thought seems to press itself more and more and more in this tradition.
Yeah, yes, there's two powerful things there. One is what you're saying about the art versus words, right? And so the Hebrew and the whole Judeo-Christian traditions are all about the follow the law, follow the words. The logos is the word. And smash the art, but smash the art. Don't use the art, use the words. So that's left brain, right brain, and that totally tracks with all this matriarchy, patriarchy, and this is a big theme for us here on the whole project. But then secondly, the original point I wanted to make was the separation from nature in this time period. Um, this is the Greeks and the Hebrews both. It's like a defining characteristic of their worldview. And in contrast to Egyptian religion, in Egyptian religion, where Isis was tops, who's Mother Nature, they continue to have their gods be half human, half animals, because they saw themselves as fundamentally a part of nature. But the Greeks and the Hebrews both rejected that. And for the Greeks, that was like a big deal. The Greeks said human beings are the highest creation of God, and we are not part of nature. And so the Hebrews are doing the same thing. Both those cultures, and those in turn are the twin foundations of Western civilization. The Hebrews and the Greeks, which in turn become the Christians and the Romans. That's those are the four corners of Western civilization, and they are fundamentally, foundationally, worldviews is that we are not a part of nature. We are separate from nature. We are above nature and firmly patriarchal and firmly separated from nature. And so they reject all these Egyptian presentations, half man, half God. All their gods are presented in human anthropomorphic form. So that's foundational. That's why to get back to the goddess, we actually have to move beyond Western civilization. Literally, the whole intellectual foundation of Western civilization is hostile to the goddess. It's hostile to nature. And so, but life goes on. Western civilization is going to last forever. Personally, I want ecological civilization as what to come next. So um, that's my shtick. So um, Israeli archaeologists have found evidence of Hezekiah's reforms. So we have discussed the Tel Arad temple previously. It is the only temple site ever recovered in Judah from the first temple period. The Holy of Holies in this Tel Arad temple was carefully dismantled and buried by hand with sand. The pair of altars and pair of standing stones were laid over on their sides and not broken. These pairs correspond to Yahweh and Asherah and simultaneously demonstrate Israelite paganism and also the reforms of Hezekiah. Residue on the incense altars were analyzed in 2020, with the larger altar to Yahweh having frankincense and the smaller altar to Asherah containing cannabis. And this stuff is all from the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. This is all like very important archaeology. This is so what's on the left there in black and white is how they found the stones. You see the altars laid down on their side and the standing stones kind of, I guess they've been picked up there. But anyway, the altars are on their sides and they're not broken. And that's after they like carefully dug it all out. They weren't like wrecked in a war or anything. They were buried by hand. And then on the right is what you see reconstructed. And that's how they show it in the Israel Museum. Although they'll take away, in some of the exhibits, they take away the standing stone on the right, which has the Asherah, which is for Asherah, because even that is controversial, even though the Israelis are pretty open-minded about this stuff, unlike the Christians, but even that's going a bit too far. They don't put that in the museum. So
it's just an absolute war against her. I mean, it's just around every corner.
But yeah, this is where some of the best Yahweh and Asherah stuff is coming from, these sites. Archaeologists excavated the town of Lachish, which we will discuss some more below, and they found something unusual inside of. Oh, actually, I want to go back and forgot one point. Some people, a lot of scholars will suggest, and there's a whole line of argument about these Tel Arad site, that it was never buried for the reforms, that it was buried because the Assyrians were coming and they were about to sack the entire region. And so they buried it to protect it. Now, that is actually that's a perfectly defensible argument. And like, I can see the merit in the logic of that position. I don't agree with it, but it is an argument you could make. The Assyrians did in fact come through and demolish everything. And that's one of the reasons why this site survived, is because it had been buried and it was buried before the Assyrians wrecked it, because the Assyrians presumably would have wrecked it. So you could take that. I think it's worth pointing out that that is one of the arguments being made. But that's also coming from the postmodernists who don't want, the Bible to have any of these stories to have any truth at all. They don't want these stories to be half true or true in a different way. They have to have them be zero truth. And I think that's just an ideological position that a lot of these scholars take. They're hard atheists and stuff, So anyway, they excavated the town of Lachish. We'll talk some more about that. And they found something unusual. Inside of a shrine, they found a commode, like a toilet, alongside smashed altars. And this also appears to be evidence of Hezekiah's reforms and tracks with the story we see during King Jehu, which we talked about, when they desecrated the temple of Baal and made it into a latrine in 2 Kings 27. So they talk about turning a temple into a latrine. And here it is. Here's a toilet that they plugged out from Lachish. That's an old Israelite toilet. It's probably worked. So anyway, Hezekiah's tunnel. This is also fantastic archaeology here. Hezekiah did rebel against Assyria, and he stopped paying tribute, allying himself with Egypt instead. Knowing full well that Jerusalem would face an Assyrian siege as a result, he undertook a major building campaigns to prepare the city, fortifying the broad wall of Jerusalem and constructing towers along it. Hezekiah also commissioned one of the most impressive engineering achievements of the ancient world. Jerusalem's water supply came from the Gihon Spring, which lay outside the city walls, a serious vulnerability in the event of a siege. To protect the water and deny it to the Assyrians, Hezekiah had a long tunnel cut through solid rock to channel the spring's water directly into the city of David. This tunnel runs 583 yards, or 533 meters, and was excavated by two separate teams working from opposite ends, meeting almost perfectly in the middle, a feat that required remarkably sophisticated engineering and measurement for that era. Modern scholars still haven't fully determined how the two teams managed to find each other underground, although there's all sorts of theories. It's actually a pretty impressive feat. I think it's like I'm not sure how deep it is, tens of feet, 100 feet underground or something. It's pretty deep. And, um, and it, almost 600 yards. And they dug it from opposite sides. So anyway, the tunnel was eventually sealed and lost by an earthquake sometime in the Middle Ages. But archaeologists later rediscovered it and have dug it out. And now today, tourists can walk through it. An inscription carved into the tunnel wall commemorates the exact moment over 2,700 years ago when the two digging teams broke through and met. So from Second Chronicles, it was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon Spring and channeled it down to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all that he did. So this is the actual site. This is from Wikipedia. That's the tunnel that you can walk through as a tourist. And then on the right, you can see the sign that's mounted on the wall in there. On the bottom is the actual inscription that's been there all along. And it says, "You are standing at the place where the Shiloh inscription, written approximately 2,700 years ago during the reign of King Hezekiah, was discovered." So that's actual historical Hebrew writing in the wall in this tunnel. Pretty cool, from like 715 BC or 710 or something. So anyway, in 701 BC, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked Judah, laying waste to the countryside and capturing every fortified city in his path. Lachish, which was a heavily defended fortress roughly 80 miles from Jerusalem and the second most important city in Judah, fell to the Assyrians in a major and decisive victory. Sennacherib was proud enough of the achievement to commission huge stone reliefs celebrating it, which now reside in the British Museum, these are the same reliefs we discussed in the last episode. The biblical writers, tellingly, barely mention this catastrophic defeat. What they do record is that after Lachish fell and its people were slaughtered, Hezekiah's envoys went there to meet the Assyrians and offer tribute. Hezekiah stripped the temple and the royal treasury of all their gold and silver to pay the Assyrians off and spare Jerusalem a siege. So this is going to be well documented. So 2 Kings 18. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent this message to the king of Assyria at Lachish: "I have done wrong. Withdraw from me, and I will pay you whatever you demand of me." The king of Assyria exacted from Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. So Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the temple of Yahweh and in the treasuries of the royal palace. At this time, Hezekiah, king of Judah, stripped off the gold with which he had covered the doors and doorposts of the temple of Yahweh and gave it to the king of Assyria. So this meeting between Hezekiah and Sennacherib was independently recorded by the Assyrians themselves. Sennacherib's own inscriptions describe laying siege to Jerusalem and departing only after extracting heavy tribute, boasting that he left Hezekiah trapped in his own palace like a bird in a cage. The Assyrian account inflates the silver figure from 300 to 800 talents and adds Hezekiah's daughters and concubines to the tribute list, but is otherwise strikingly consistent with the biblical record. This account survives today on the Taylor Prism, a large six-sided cuneiform inscription detailing Sennacherib's campaigns, unearthed in the ruins of Nineveh that we talked about last week, and now held in the British Museum alongside the Lachish reliefs. So this is a picture of it. It's a pretty cool object, and this isn't even AI. This one was actually good enough that this is the actual picture from the British Museum. It's got six sides. It's all cuneiform, and it's pretty tall. It's like 6 feet tall or something. It's like a big thing. It would have been a pretty cool thing for the archaeologists. I mean, imagine if you were the guy who dug that out of the ground. That was a pretty big prize. And anyway, this is what it says on it. As to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to his strong cities, walled forts, and countless small villages, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams brought near the walls, with an attack by foot soldiers, using mines, breaches, as well as trenches. I drove out 200,150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, big and small cattle beyond counting, and considered them slaves. Himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence, like a bird in a cage. I surrounded him with earthwork in order to molest those who were his city's gate. Thus I reduced his country, but I still increased the tribute and the presents to me as overlord, which I imposed upon him beyond the former tribute, to be delivered annually. Hezekiah himself did send to me later to Nineveh, my lordly city, together with 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver, precious stones, antimony, large cuts of red stone, couches inlaid with ivory, Nimedu chairs inlaid with ivory, elephant hides, ebony wood, boxwood, and all kinds of valuable treasures, his own daughters and his concubines. So that's what the archaeologists have. That's pretty cool, guys. Don't you think? Don't tell me none of the Bible is true. Like that's like word for word.
I think it's so cool because I mean, it's really like an ancient monument, right? I mean, we have
Yeah.
modern ones, but
Oh yeah, they
that
would have
would be
put this up in
really
the town square or in the palace or something for everybody to read and gawk at and talk about how awesome their emperor is. I mean, this is total propaganda.
totally. It's
Um,
awesome.
so the biblical narrative does not end with the tribute payment. According to the text, Sennacherib accepted the payment and departed, only to return and threaten Jerusalem's destruction a second time. This time, the city was said to be saved through direct divine intervention. Um, Now, the Assyrians don't say anything about any of this stuff. So, upon hearing, but this is from the Bible, upon hearing that the Assyrians had returned, Hezekiah despaired. He put on sackcloth and went to the temple to pray for deliverance, arguing before Yahweh that every other god the Assyrians had destroyed was nothing more than wood and stone, while Yahweh alone was the one true God. So, this is from the Bible, 2 Kings 19. When King Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into the temple of Yahweh. It is true, Yahweh, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Yahweh, our God, deliver us from this hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Yahweh, are God. So, according to the Bible, Yahweh heard Hezekiah and saved Jerusalem. So the story continues, 2 Kings 19. Therefore, this is what Yahweh says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter the city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares Yahweh. I will defend this city and save it for my sake and for the sake of David, my servant. That night, the angel of Yahweh went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, they were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. So the Assyrians left no record of any such catastrophe, though it's fair to say that a decimated army is not the kind of thing an empire would memorialize in its own annals. Interestingly, the Egyptians preserved a strikingly similar legend about the very same campaign. They claim that Sennacherib was repulsed in Egypt when his army was decimated in a single night by a plague of field mice that chewed through their bowstrings and shield thongs, rendering them defenseless. Whatever happened, the outcome is not in dispute. Jerusalem survived. It was never sacked by the Assyrians, even as the rest of Judah was laid waste around it. This deliverance became the foundation for a powerful and lasting belief among the Hebrews that Yahweh was a truly great God, and that Jerusalem itself was inviolable, protected by divine decree. That confidence held strong for more than a century until the city was finally burned by the Babylonians. Um, so Sennacherib,
So
go ahead.
I I'm sorry. I'm just like wondering, what do you think, like what could be plausible explanations for what took place there? You know, did was their army decimated somehow overnight? What could have done that? I mean, I'm just thinking it sounds really far fetched, including the plague of mice,
Right. Yeah,
right?
both stories sound far fetched, and it is interesting that there's an Egyptian story and a Hebrew story, and you're reading propaganda from both sides, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, and neither not captured anywhere. I mean, Sennacherib presumably could have stuck around Jerusalem longer. Maybe something happened to in his camp that like he decided it wasn't worth it. Maybe a bunch of guys got sick and they decided to go home. I mean, something more
I'm
mundane.
thinking poisoned water or water that had, yeah, like water that was contaminated or something. That's the only thing to me that makes sense. Or like whatever their stores, like something was rotted or contaminated in some way. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, assuming it actually happened at all. I mean,
Right.
the Book of Chronicles totally makes up a bunch of stuff, like with Manasseh. They clearly add on to the stories. They alter the stories of David and Solomon a lot to make them more digestible from their perspective. They shave off a lot of rough edges around what you see in the Book of Kings. The Book of Kings is still propaganda, but it's playing a little closer to historical reality. So it's interesting to have this story in there. I'm not really sure what to make of it, to be honest with you. He may have paid him tribute, and they were getting sick, and he decided to go home. Um,
But was it Yahweh?
well, when I illustrate these in the graphic novels, we'll have fun with this part.
Okay.
So Sennacherib. So now this is the guy from the king of Assyria, mind you. He comes to an untimely end. We talked about him a little bit last week. He was murdered in 681 BC in his palace at Nineveh by his own sons as punishment for his sacrilege. He desecrated Babylon. This is the guy who attacked Babylon and opened up the canals and flooded the city. It desecrated all the Babylonian temples of Marduk and the other ancient gods, which was considered so outrageous to the public that his own sons killed him for the sacrilege. So, Sennacherib. This is from the Bible. One day, while he was worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch, I don't know who Nisroch is, his sons Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, succeeded him as king. So that's the end of what we got. Next episode, we'll talk about the pagan king Manasseh, who was the longest lived and one of the most successful kings of Judah, and his grandson, the second great reformer, Josiah, who was not as long lived or successful. But that'll be next week. So yeah, that's what I got for the prepared parts.
We're entering the time frame of what's happening in Greece with Pythagoras and those kinds of intellectuals. We're starting to get into that age where the Western world is going to start developing
Yes,
in the
it's a
ways
good point. We are directly comparable to when Greek history kicks in. The first Greek, they mark it with the first Greek Olympics, which is 700 something BC, and Pythagoras is right immediately around this time. And he's like the first of the really great that we still like are living by his stuff. Great Greek philosophers. We're also contemporary to Homer and Hesiod, and the oldest Greek mythology is also in the 700s BC. It's because that's when they get literacy and start writing stuff down. And so it's all in this time period. I think Pandora, which is where Pandora is the original woman and she's the source of all men's troubles. She's comparable to Eve. That's a story from Hesiod. Again, all in this same general time period.
Well, and this would make sense because we just read the consolidation of authority there in Jerusalem. And, like what we were discussing before we went on air tonight, the Pythagoras could possibly be one of the Greek fathers, if you want to call him a father, but like one of the Greek minds that maybe initiated the whole monad into the Western
Western psyche.
Psyche, yeah. So this could be the very time frame. It'd be really interesting to kind of dig into this time frame to see what other strands of thought, as far as that consolidation of a godhead, the consolidation of power and authority is going on right here in this 6th, 7th century, 5th, 6th 7th century before Christ here.
Yeah, so Lisa, before you came on, we were talking about like the origins of like the one, like a monad, like we're all one and it's just one, there's not two. And Joshua was informing me that he thinks it's coming from Pythagoras. He thinks might be the original source of that, which is not an idea I was familiar with. Do you know anything about Pythagoras? I know a lot about Pythagoras does all this sacred geometry and sacred math. It's really fantastically interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally true. Still use the Pythagorean theorem and for triangles, and he talks about music and like rhythms, rhythmic patterns, and the mathematics behind music. Like really fascinating stuff. And he's like a total mystical religious leader.
Yeah.
So you're saying that he's possibly responsible for this idea getting into the Western mindset, but where did the idea, because I'm going to call it an idea, where did the idea or the concept for Yahweh come from? You know, like where did that originate in the psyche or the mind of, I don't know, somebody? I mean, because nowadays, or even say medieval times or what have you, Dark Ages, if somebody said that God spoke to them, they were cuckoo, right? They were mentally ill. There was a problem with that, especially if it was a woman. But then like, and if somebody right now said, well, God spoke to me, like in this day and age, we would also be like, oh yeah, sure, buddy. Right. God spoke to you.
Depends what tradition you're coming from. I mean, Christians say this stuff evangelicals say this stuff all the time. That God
yeah, but like, right. But it only counts if you are a priest or a preacher or whatever, right? It doesn't count if you're not one of them, right? It doesn't count if you're not an authority. So whoever maybe back in the day when the idea or the concept of Yahweh came about, like, was that somebody hearing the voice of a God or a spirit, or was that schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder? I mean, right, like where did that come from? How did that come about?
Well, we've kind of been tracking in this GBS Bible study the evolution of Yahweh from that original.
The evolution of Yahweh, like that character, comes from this tribal god, and there's all this scholarship on, does he come from Midian and Saudi Arabia and that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sort of content that the tribal god gets elevated during this time period and then becomes the monotheistic God, which we will get to. That point, the break into monotheism comes after the exile to Babylon, after the first temple is burned down, because then that liberates him from being attached to that geography. Because all these pagan gods in this era are always attached to a given region, and like it's the Baal of this town, the Baal of that town, and Ashur is the god of this, empire, and it's always very geographically constrained. Which goes hand in hand with changing the names of the gods, because like you go to this town, we worship Ishtar with this name, and but it's in Second Isaiah is where it shows up in the Bible, and we will get to this when we get to that time period. But it's that's when it starts to show up as monotheistic language. There's not even monotheistic language during this part of the Bible. He always talks in like pagan terms. It's only when we get to Second Isaiah, when they're in Babylon or it's in the Persian period, where they start to talk in monotheistic language, where it's not just that you will have no other gods before me, which is like monolatry, but it's there are no other gods at all. The other gods don't exist.
Yeah,
that comes in Second Isaiah, and it comes in Babylon, like 5th century. It's a little
we just read it. We just read it with that last bit of text that you just said, that there was no other God there. How did he say it there? There was no other. Show proof that, protect Jerusalem or whatever, and show proof that. I mean, so you already see that seed of thought right before the Babylonians here with the Assyrians.
Yeah, but this is getting written down a lot later. This is all written down in the Persian period. So by the time it's being put to paper, they've gotten to monotheism.
That's true.
Okay. So, but then Pythagoras comes along and, clearly is brilliant and is figuring out all these things about geometry and so on, which is important because if you're living in a third dimensional time space continuum, the whole way that this works, that we are able to be in this time and space together and with, I guess, we'll call it shared reality, though anymore, I think that's kind of like a joke. But if we're living in a shared reality, math is the very thing, math and geometry is exactly what makes this all possible. It's what orders things, right? It's what
Right.
makes it all work. So, but then Pythagoras has these ideas and sees the connections and everything, which is where you're saying the monadic idea possibly originated. But so that's different though, right? To me, than monotheism or the idea of a one God, because that one God in monotheism seems entirely separate, right, from this 3D time space continuum in which we exist. But in a monadic sense, it's all one, including God or the divine or so on.
It's a great point, and I think it really helped me here. What I would say about what Pythagoras is doing is sort of build the building blocks that would eventually become monotheism. But what your point is perfect, that in a shared reality, math really is what the lingua franca that we can all agree on across languages, across cultures, that like the Pythagorean theorem is something if you're in China or India or Russia or in America, we can all agree on a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is a metaphysical reality that we share, and that without something like that, that we can all definitively say is the same for everybody across all cultures, then we don't have something that we can say is the same across cultures. Um, and if you have like a really primitive culture that doesn't have the kind of mathematics, and they can't relate to a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then they would not be living in our same shared reality. They would be living in some other reality because of a different mental space, which is the kind of stuff they describe with like pygmies and indigenous people that have been, still detached from modern civilization. They don't even know like about math and stuff. Some called, anthropologists have come across different tribes, isolated tribes that don't know the first thing about math, and like you can't even explain it to them. And so if you brought something like that into civilization, they would be completely lost. They wouldn't even be able to grok the city or whatever. But that point about the math becomes the shared point is great, and that in turn sets the stage for one true God is everything. Even though Pythagoras wouldn't have been saying that, he probably is doing the Eleusinian mysteries for all I know. I'm pretty sure he did, in fact.
Oh, that's a good question. Should look that up.
I did look it up for
So
Plato because Plato did it.
So here's the next part of that though, in the way that I understand things and metaphysics and so on. So if everything is monadic, which I think like we can say it is, then it's also paradoxical because it is also dyadic.
Right.
And I know that Joshua, this has been like kind of part of your thing and you're like exploring all of this. But to me, you can't separate one and two. They like the two are one, the one is two. It's a paradox, but paradox is like where everything comes together. That's magic, that's mysticism. Like you cannot separate those. That's like two sides of a coin. And where it all overlaps is where the magic is, where everything exists.
Yes, that we were exactly this is exactly the conversation we were having. The paradox of being a dualist and a non-dualist. I embrace this paradox. I'm a non-dualist in the sense that I totally agree that all is one and we're all on the one. Like I'm an old P-Funk guy, like we're all on the one. Alan Watts, we're all on the one. This is what the Hindus teach us, Brahman, it's all one single reality. But then in turn, that reality is a fabric with warp and weft threads. This is how I describe it. It's a fabric of reality, and that fabric is mind and matter. Mind and matter coming together, forming the fabric of reality, with the reality as the emergent property of mind and matter. So I'm a non-dualist. I mean, I am a dualist. Totally believe there's mind and matter. I totally believe there's God and goddess working together, in each with their own action and authority and power, interacting back and forth, dynamically. Um, so, and then that's a paradox to be a dualist and a non-dualist simultaneously. And I just think that reflects I also think it reflects the limitations of the human mind that, like, I don't think I can get past that intellectually. Like, I think that sort of hits the wall for me of like my metaphysics of how the cosmos fits together.
But I do think more in terms of primordial energies that are more like yin and yang. I think that's it's more primordial than that when it comes to the dualism part. But then and also I wouldn't call it mind and matter because it is so primordial. Like we're not there yet. We haven't developed brains at this point. I think that comes later. And then because math is and geometry is what organizes everything, then after two comes three, right? And so on and so forth. So it's all organized by math. It just is.
There's some interesting things though that can throw some of that stuff like upside down. I mean, we can see unity, we can see the one like a child coming from two, from parents. So it's not always the case, and I think this is the assumption that we've somehow bought in, is that one is necessary in order for everything else to exist. And yeah, I think it is possible, though we've never been given like the language, the ability to think in these terms, because we think in with the words of our culture, and our
Mhm.
culture has been so formed by a monadic modality that we can't think in any other terms than what we're trying to describe right now. And my suspicion, or my thinking process, and it could be completely quack and like heterodox to the absolute core from, well, it's definitely that from a Western point of view, is that we're not, is it possible that the dyad is not just, it's a real dyad. It's not an operation of a monad. It's not something that comes after in time. That which is the fabric of reality is two eternal, uncreated principles that were never at all united, but that which is united is created, and that's what we're all participating in.
And
This is
you
a
made
system
you
of
made the
thought that I don't know if it's ever articulated in this way. Maybe it is. I'm just not aware of
well,
it.
you made the point earlier, Joshua, that we start with two, and from two we get one.
Right.
Instead of like from one, because we normally think of like you start with one and then one divides and you get two. But you made this point earlier that you start with two, and from two you get one, and that corresponds to the Trinity of Mother, Father, Son, the Isis Trinity. You
Yes.
start with the Mother, Father, and they give birth to the Son, who is the Lord. He's the God. He's the Horus or Jesus.
Yeah.
So you start with the Mother, Father, and then you get the Lord. And so I think that's a powerful starting point. That from two you get one, and which in turn becomes the Trinity.
So I
So
think we're totally doing the chicken or the egg thing, right? I
it
mean,
is. It is.
it's
It's
the same thing.
no, but see, the chicken and the egg is such a beautiful thing too, because think of this. I mean, when you talk about zero, when we're even talking about ones, the concept of whether zero is an actual number or not. Is it or is it not? Like,
The
yeah, zero
void.
comes after one, but does one come after zero? This is a this is an interesting thing to start talking about. And so
Yeah.
that zero is an egg in a sense. It's
Looks like one.
you could call it chaos without order, because you can't nominate it, you can't give it a number because it's in chaos, but it's definitely something. which is where I'm getting at with the goddesses. The substance, the primordial chaos, is something you can't give it a number because it's not been organized. Perhaps maybe that's where the one comes in. But we're seeing two distinct things here that when they merge, something comes about. That's creation. But there's two
Creation.
separate, uncreated realities that I'm maintaining is distinct, a real dyad, not a monad that gets uncomfortable with itself and it's like, oh, I think I'm bored. I want to create something. Let's do two. That we're talking about something that's interacting and relationship wise, not some kind of monastic, I'm just going to separate or just return to this one entity and just be myself and not be curious.
So it's almost like they were both, let's say, both monads that got together. So it could be that. I think in a way you could also consider a monad more if there is, let's say it's uncreated, right? But that is existence, like the monad. If everything is connected, then that is existence. But then when you talk about the two things coming together, and that's creation, I really think about how like atoms and particles and electrons and things, how they can be in different places at the same time. And that I think there's that within some of that scientific understanding, I think it's really energetic and really spiritual and really mystical at the same time. And I think that all of that sort of goes together in some way that I have yet to like fully grok.
Well, I mean, it might be why we can't reconcile the two major theories of science. I mean, maybe we don't have the words for it.
To that point. So the Hindus, I go with what the Hindu description of Shiva Shakti, that Shiva is source consciousness. Before you even get to mind, before you get to self-awareness, it's just source consciousness. And Shakti is source matter. And then they come together, and then the gods are born from there. But also regarding science, I think this is quantum mechanics and Newtonian physics. The Newtonian physics is the mass and energy and matter of Shakti, and that quantum mechanics is describing the idea space. Like, where do ideas reside? And ideas are entangled. Same people can have ideas, the same idea spread across time and space, unconnected from each other materially, but still share the same ideas or even have telepathic thoughts. We see quantum entanglement in ideas all the time. Like, it's not even hard to prove. And so you see how, ideas shape the material world. Ideas shape the material world all the time. And Plato talks about ideas give an object form. Like, this material matter. The determinists would say this shirt is arrived because of a deterministic universe. And if we knew enough data, we could map it out like in a computer program. But that's not what Plato says. Plato says that this comes from an idea. Somebody had the idea to make a shirt. And so they assembled all the raw materials, the matter, into the form of a shirt. So it starts with an idea, but the matter congeals around the idea. Like, that's the catalyst for the matter to come together. And that's why God is the creator, because all ideas come from the Godhead, come from that source consciousness.
The thing that I would just push back on Plato, it sounds like such hubris to say these things. Who am I to, but I'm going to, is that Plato subjugates the mother matter below the idea.
Yeah, I don't agree with everything Plato says.
No, but what I'm saying is the Western mind predominantly subjugates matter, the mother, and we see it in what we've been studying. We see it in our conversations, and what feminism is really struggling with is this deeply philosophical Hellenistic mindset that goes back to this 5th, 6th century BCE that we're kind of talking about.
Right.
And so when Plato starts to talk about this world, or the place where the ideas get formed, the idea is that matter is subjugated. It's not, she is not something that's co-reigns with ideas. She's placed in some way, rather than a co-equal,
Yeah.
co-reigning.
Yeah, he very specifically says that the world realm of ideas is perfect. That's the perfect world, and we're in the imperfect world. And this is all about like the material world is fallen and sinful and yada yada yada. And all this way,
And I
all the
think that's
religions.
Pythagoras. I
All
think
right,
that's the
and
Pythagoras idea in
it's
him.
definitely the axial. All the axial age religions that come out. All of our modern religions are coming from the same time period.
Yeah,
Confucius, Buddha,
right.
the Hebrew prophets, the Greek.
Exactly.
They all go towards these transcendent traditions of meditation and the afterlife, and they separate from the shamanism and the nature-based. The whole world does. I don't know why, but the whole world goes in this direction.
I think we
Of
do know
separating
why.
away.
I think we do know why, because if everything is one, there's nothing to be learned. There's nothing to be found out. It's simply to go inside yourself, connect with the one, and all is done. When
I think
there is interest, there's what is this? There's curiosity, there's relationship, there's nature. If there's just one, there's nothing to observe.
I think part of it is because the more and more like villages and societies that were formed, people were like didn't have to put so much emphasis on their connection to the natural surroundings and their survival. And so therefore, sort of at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? They were able to turn their focus more into what they could think and create with their minds and then with their hands. And so the reason matter gets subjugated is because they're able to manipulate it, right? They're able to take something that of material and manipulate it to form the thing that they thought of, that idea or that concept. So that's part of like just on a really basic level, right?
No, I think it's a great point. I think it's a great point that as we go from being hunter-gatherers to living inside walled cities with food supplies, and you're not on the edge of like survival on a day-to-day basis, like the animals, you're able to like separate away from nature mentally. It's a great point. It also goes hand in hand with patriarchy, obviously, but that's a great point. That as we get more civilized, we become more mental. I mean, literally become more mental.
And not necessarily in the best ways as
Right now we're just going completely
playing
mental.
out.
Yeah, I mean, we subjugated the wild bull. We domesticated animals and made them servants for us to plow our fields and to grow crops. And I can see that point, that the more that happens, the less connected to nature we really become. And we're even changing the nature of the animal itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're no longer living among the animals. We're the masters of the animals. And as to your point, as we domesticate them, their form changes. Like we breed horses, and today's horses, like they need their feet fixed and have horseshoes. Like they wouldn't even be able to survive. Cows couldn't survive in nature at all.
I mean, it makes you wonder if
the pigs seem to do all right.
What's that?
I said the pigs seem to do all right though when they escape.
Oh. Yeah. Well, you think about the consciousness, like, did we possibly breed the animals that we interact with the most? I would say the dogs, the cats, the chickens, the cows, the things that we, feed ourselves from. Did we possibly breed in a certain sense, consciousness out of them? Like was there, or
well, they're definitely still intelligent. There's no question they still suffer and have emotions. And
they become a lot more human.
I had a really striking experience when I was pretty like college age. My buddy or cousin out west had cattle, and we went out on ATVs to chase around these cattle, and they do some herding because one had given birth. And so she had run off to give birth and like had left the herd with her baby, and she wasn't doing anything, but we had to go chase them around with the ATVs to like get her back in the herd. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is like a really like perfectly emotional reaction, a perfectly normal, human-like type thing for this animal. And that one experience alone, I think, really forced me to like just give the animals credit. I mean, I don't think I'd ever really thought about it that much, prior to that. But I was like, wow, they really are thinking and intelligent, aren't they? Like these big, dumb, smelly, dirty cow, but like clearly has emotions and clearly paying attention to what's going on.
Look at elephants. I
Yeah.
mean, right? Look at elephants. But I want to go back to something. You spoke of string theory, Ed. That is clearly legitimate, because if you look at all of like the ancient like mystical understandings, and throughout the world, all these different systems, they all came to the same conclusions, but with different words and with different, maybe sort of like organizational charts about how they thought it worked. But they were able to take so many of the same fundamental concepts due to their observations of how life works and in nature and so on. And they all came up with the same things. They understand the same mysteries and the same wisdoms. They just had different different ways of speaking about it and different understandings about how those things were organized. And I think that is really, that if it comes down to it, and I shared that one video with you guys on our chat, but when it comes down to it, all that stuff, it's all the same understandings. It's the same fundamental wisdoms and mysteries that a lot of people sort of like miss out on, because they're focused on these monotheistic traditions that have a very odd way of trying to explain the way that life works and the way things are organized. And it doesn't go at all with this ancient wisdom. But they all, from different parts of the world, they all understood the same things around the same
And
time.
the church shuts it down because it undermines their claims of monotheism. So that's why the stuff that's in the Mysteries of Isis, which was not, it's always presented to us as being like sinister or something. Mysteries of Isis were like the most popular religion in the Roman Empire, totally open to the whole public, salvation religion for all people. But they have this, inner teachings that you have to be a student of to get to it, which is fine. But then when the church comes along and shuts down the Isis religion, that stuff then becomes labeled occult, and it becomes labeled forbidden knowledge. And so that becomes what becomes the Hermeticism, and what becomes the Templars, and these other occult traditions all come directly from Isis, basically. That's kind of what I've kind of come to figure out. And they arrive to us sort of bastardized and fractured and incomplete. But they're fundamentally rooted. The Hermetic traditions come from Isis and survive through the Templars, the Rosicrucians, and these other esoteric groups from the Middle Ages, or from back then all the way until through the Middle Ages to now.
Well, occult, that word just means something that is hidden, something that it's mystery. Like
right.
it's not like something bad, right? It's just that it's hidden.
I would add to that.
Yeah.
Begs the question: hidden by whom and from whom? Hidden by the church from the people. Like it's a cult because the church labeled it the occult. Says you're not allowed to study this stuff, or else we'll burn you at the stake. Like how about that? That's what when I said hidden. I don't think of it in any sort of mystical sense. I think it's like literally hidden by penalty of the church.
Right.
Well, we've discussed this in past conversations where things to be, culted is to protect like the mysteries from being profaned, but then you also have culted in order to keep the power consolidated, and maybe sometimes those things go hand in hand, because you don't want powerful potions to be in the hands of people that would hurt themselves, maybe, as just an
some stuff
example.
needs to be protected. Nuclear weapons should be protected. We shouldn't be handing out like the blueprints to, all sorts of stuff that's dangerous and needs to be kept. No, you're right. Like plant medicines are super potent. You don't just hand that stuff out.
Well,
I know.
this is a great example, because like those plant medicines, like we've talked about this, it to the outsider who's never done anything like that, and to the sterilized, monists that basically obtain all their spirituality through books and reading, the very idea that you can open up yourselves to a consciousness that's in plants or in insects or in animals is so ludicrous and demonic, and all the other things that they would want to cast blame on, or say is just kooky and crazy, and then move on with their day. But this is a real phenomenon that can happen. And getting back to this, the consciousness or the life that's in the insects and the creatures and the giraffes and the elephants, and this is a relational experience that we, as being alive and conscious, have with the world. And when you become so predominantly interested in only yourself, in the monad, in the one, you don't look to have a relationship with anything else except for yourself and that divine life inside of you, which I think is the monadic cult that we're referring to. And it separates us from nature. It separates us from ourselves, because we are nature. We're thinking in a natural body that came from a mother and a father at some point. We just didn't pop here ex nihilo and just, here we are just to meditate and be reabsorbed into the monad. So it's like all of this stuff just kind of circles back on itself, not to keep on repeating, but like the monadic thought needs to really be challenged. And that's what I'm trying to do with my participation here.
But here it's so funny, because I just shared that post with you on Instagram about the secret society that is the Bohemian Grove out in California. And it's all the most like wealthy, rich, powerful men throughout the world and in politics and so on. And these guys get together out in this special sacred place, and they literally do rituals, like occult type rituals. And it's also where they get together and they plot and they plan like how they want to control everything.
No, 100%.
And yeah, and they really are, but it's ironic, right? Because if the occult thing, it's not, it's off limits, but at the same time, these are the same people that run the Heritage Foundation and are trying to turn everything into like Christian nationalism, and Christianity is the U.S. is like official religion and all that stuff, but they're out there doing these these rituals and stuff. It's so wild.
It's totally true. As I was mentioning, the occult traditions survived through these esoteric groups. They were sponsored by the elites. It was the elites that held on to it all the way through the centuries. These have always held on in elite circles. That's the ones who sponsored all these different groups, Rosicrucians and all these Templars. They're always sponsored by elites. And so it's always been elites that held on to it, kept the knowledge for themselves, did not share it with the public, but they use the magic whenever and wherever they can to try and take over the world.
The Masonic temple.
That's part of when I was saying the stuff gets bastardized, that the mysteries of ISIS are bastardized when they get down to us. It's because they've been passed through these elites that have been using them for their own nefarious purposes and not for making the world a better place. They're using it just to make their own position better, which is a total distortion of what this knowledge is supposed to be all about.
And you hit it on the head. And so this is where this conversation could get really fascinating, because like you said, in their minds, they might think that they're actually doing good. Hey, we're organizing society. They need us to be the brainchild and all the, and they're using these occult practices. They think they're actually doing good. But when it really gets down to it, where do you think is the the dividing line. I mean, you and I, we can all judge like Bohemian Grove, evil, right? Can we? I mean, everybody raises their hand. That for me, for them, they think they're probably doing what is the litmus test, the dividing line, the I have my own ideas on this I'm going to share, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts first of what that is. What separates that from the good from the bad, to use the opposites that were
Well, look, I think it's pretty simple for
after
me.
you.
If the oligarchs aren't willing to be public and tell us what they're getting up to, then I assume they're getting up to something bad. I assume the worst. That I assume that the oligarchs are trying to take over the world. And I think it's a fairly narrow cabal of oligarchs. This is why I don't like the capitalism socialism framework, because it's not about like modestly wealthy people. We're not talking about your wealthy restaurant owners. We're talking about the elite. We're talking about the apex of the pyramid. Where the real super money. Those guys live in a universe of their own that we have no access to. And if they're not going to come out and tell us what they're doing, I assume they're trying to take over the world.
They are literally working not just for personal gain and for power, but also to take away certain things from like normal everyday people. I mean, that obviously includes healthcare and education and access. And I mean, they're really literally plotting that, and they have been for decades. That society started back in, I believe it was the 1800s. It's been around for a long time. And, that is literally where Project 2025 was originally conceived. And I think that was back during the Reagan era. And that's when they started the whole like trickle down economics nonsense that clearly isn't working. I mean, it really is that they're not operating out of the idea that they're doing, that they know the best and they're helping out us little people. They literally are advocating for more money and more power for themselves. And then they're like almost like a monopoly board or a chessboard. They are plotting out and figuring out the players and the placement and everything, and the structures and the systems to implement and how to implement those, how to get around the laws, how, who to put on the Supreme Court. They've been up to that for decades.
Sure.
At least.
Yes. And they want to, part of the strategy is endless divide and conquer. Divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide. It's what they did to the Native Americans. It's how European colonialism worked. You go into these foreign lands and you split the differences between groups of people and get them fighting amongst themselves. So they're endlessly, and they've been doing this for the last 200 years, endlessly trying to get us fighting amongst themselves. This is the purpose of racism. The whole point of stoking racism as a top-down phenomenon is to keep the common folks fighting amongst themselves so that we're all at each other's throats and we're not paying attention to the oligarchs that are making off with everything. And so they endlessly stoke all this divisive social stuff to keep us fighting. I'm totally convinced the whole trans agenda. I have nothing against trans people, but the trans politics is totally divisive. And I'm totally convinced that it's being done intentionally to fuck us up. Like they fuck up our healthcare intentionally, make us all sick. So if we're all too sick to be healthy and get our shit together because we're all worried about just being ill all the time, they intentionally give us unhealthy food. They have because they're content. They'll burn it all down as long as they're the guys that can be atop the flaming rubble at the end of the day. This is the logic behind nuclear war. And in Dr. Strangelove, when they're debating, dropping the bombs on the Russians, and this is Stanley Kubrick's movie from the 60s, Dr. Strangelove, about the nuclear war. These guys are calculating the survival rates, and the whole frame of reference is that they're going to be the guys that survive. They're like, yes, we'll take all these crazy casualties, millions of people dead, but we'll survive in the bunkers, and we'll come out of the bunkers, and we'll rule the flaming rubble. And so there is a logic to nuclear war for a certain group of people. It's not for anybody of the general public, but there is a 0.1% for whom all-out nuclear war is actually desirable because they're going to be the survivors and they're going to rule the flaming rubble. And so I think it's totally satanic. It's literally will to power and try to take over power of everybody through deception And like they're worshiping like this self-centered power, and it's a spiritual war. Like it's literally satanic, and it's literally spiritual warfare, and that these guys are endlessly stoking. They just flood the zone with noise. They manipulate the media, they manipulate our popular entertainment to keep us distracted. Why is Hollywood so vulgar and so violent and so disgusting and so immoral? Why is popular music so immoral? Because they want society being immoral. They don't want a holy, sacred, healthy society. That's the opposite of what they want. They want a society that's broken down so they can rule it. And they do it everywhere.
Well,
They've been doing it for 500 years.
I think we also just need to look at people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. The whole transhumanism movement is, in cahoots and oddly aligned with these Bohemian Grove rich, oligarch types. It's just weird. It's so odd.
Yeah,
and
the tech pros are definitely part of it for sure. They're the new money, but they're still real money. And serious.
Oh, yeah, real money. Yeah. Trillionaire, really? Yeah.
I mean, just before I got online, I was reading about how Google was totally funded by the CIA from the get-go and the NSA, but they totally hid that all along. Like we got grants from the National Science Foundation, but they left off all the grants from the CIA and out of their official biographies of Google. But actually, they were totally NSA granted from day one.
And it all started with Hezekiah.
We probably should wrap it up and kind of get the 90-minute mark here. This is a great conversation. This has been a good one.
Totally.
So, all right, I guess we'll wrap it up. If anyone's been still listening, thank you guys. LostGoddess.io for all the stuff. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Joshua. Please like and subscribe and all that jazz. We're now on Spotify and Substack, and not just YouTube. So, multiple channels.
Thanks, guys.